Hello, welcome everybody to episode 2 of ABL Down on the Farm, where we talk about everything prospects, but especially prospects in the ABL, the Armchair Baseball League, featuring 30 dynasty teams named after the actual Major League Baseball teams, with 20 spots on each team for prospects, which is a glorious 600 prospects and gives us a lot of prospects to talk about and think about and add and drop. And we're very fortunate tonight to be joined by one of the other ABL owners. It's John, who owns the Detroit Tigers. We'll get him on in just a second. I'm, of course, the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, although I am wearing my Cardinals gear tonight because it is the second day of the baseball season, and I am at heart a Cardinals fan. And there are a lot of us in the ABL, and we'll probably have a Cardinals fan talk at some point in the season. But without further ado, let me bring in John, our esteemed guest. There you are, John. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Good to be here, Steve.
Great. So, I wanted to have a chat with you this evening because you were in an interesting position last year during the season. You made the decision to kind of play for next year or play for future years, right? And you dumped some players fairly early in the season, I guess. And we'll get into tonight, what made you think about that and make that decision and what your strategy was, I think, in terms of restocking the farm and really trying to build for the future. And I know you weren't exclusively, focused on the farm. You want to rebuild your major league team too, right? But I'm sure some prospects were involved. But before I'd like to get into that, I just generally was hoping to get a little bit of background on you in terms of your interest in dynasty, maybe what you like about dynasty leagues, how many you might be in. And then specifically kind of what you like about the ABL and what makes it a little bit different.
Yeah. So I've been playing Dynasty since I think my first one was back in like 2008, 2009. And that was, so I didn't realize it, but I think I was kind of diving into the deep end pretty quick. It was a 30 teamer so really weirdly, it's called Armchair. I'm still in it. It's on this Pro FSL message boardy network thing. And so it was a 30 teamer, and every team got all of the players and minor leaguers from that team. And so it ended up being like 150 minor leaguers, like the full roster, just massively deep. And I was awful at it for probably 5 or 6 years. It was like it's a hell of a learning curve. And so that came in handy for this league, just because it's just a totally different world than most fantasy baseball, playing in such a big unwieldy beast.
Yeah, that does sound really intense, actually, and particularly as a first foray into dynasty. So you don't lack for courage, I guess. Good for you.
I had lots of high draft picks for lots of years.
There you go. So you're used to restocking the farm in some ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah, you're a pro at it now. So, you were involved with ABL from the start, right? You were in the initial draft. Okay. So, what's been your experience in ABL compared to other leagues, and what attracts you to it or makes it fun for you?
Yeah, I think it's been really fun because there was just a ton of kind of chatter and activity level from the beginning, and there was I think an uncommonly high level of skill from the beginning. And we had a few folks in that first draft. Any 30 teamer is going to have a few who sort of like didn't get the assignment or whatever.
Right. One person, they're no longer with us.
Yeah. And like one person I think ended up with like 3 massive superstars and then nobody else. And everybody, it was kind of like, all right, well, hopefully they stick around, and they didn't. But like for the most part, especially for such a huge league, I think it's a really, really impressive skill level, and then also just kind of a cool. Like I can't keep up on the Discord. There's so much happening, which is awesome. It's super rare, and so. Yeah, I mean, like in an either embarrassing or scary number of dynasty leagues, probably somewhere between, I'm guessing it's like 13 or 14 at this point. And like this is, if you said like, hey, look, I have a bucket of $1 million and I'll give it to you if you whittle it down to all but one league, it'd probably be this league. the ones.
Yeah. This is a special league because of the kind of the dynamic nature of it. Just not only the level of talent and being a 30-team league, but also I find just there's such a social component to it, and you can kind of pick and choose the level of your own engagement. And people come and go, but and also the trading. There's just an insane amount of trading in this league, right? I mean,
absurd. Well, and it's interesting because it's come in waves, right? So that first wave was pretty good, it was really solid, but then we had this like restocking of GMs or owners or whatever, and I think you were maybe in that next wave, right?
Yeah.
And I ended up like kind of going way all in, thinking, being a little overconfident in the first year because I was like, I'll be able to rebuild this thing. I'll compete in year 2. They'll see. And then y'all were all so strong. I was like, oh shit. Okay. Well, maybe not so much. Maybe we're gonna have to actually rebuild a little bit. Maybe y'all took like an already really high level league and put it like way through the roof. So
I think we've been able to level up for the most part, which is good. It's what you want to do, in terms of the competition. But I also think last year was interesting because several teams decided to punt early, particularly for a 30-teamer. And given the format of the league, where so many teams can make playoffs and make money in a consolation bracket, it's an interesting strategic decision. We'll get into yours, but I do think it allows people to be engaged throughout the year, and there's a strong interest in just making deals, which is just really incredible. You and I made some deals because when you were going all in, I kind of pillaged your farm system to send you major league players. So
that Yuri Perez deal is still like,
I know. It haunts you, right? And that's how it always is. It always haunts you later on, right? I mean.
I've been like had this idea for like 2 years now that I'm gonna do like a retrospective, like a dumbass retrospective of all my dumbest moves, and I will do it at some point because like I got MJ Melendez in the very last round of the initial draft, I think, and I cut him for like Connor Scott or somebody like some like barely actually a player. So. I was starting to look at it the other day and like, God, yeah, I could be really, really good.
We all have those players that haunt us. Mine is Jackson Churio, who I drafted in all my dynasty leagues early when he was 16 years old, and then he had kind of a so-so DSL campaign. And I cut him for other people that I like better for whatever reason, and now of course he's like blown up, right? And so now people like won't trade him to me. This is the guy I drafted when he was 16 years old, and like now I have to chase him. But yeah, we all have those those war stories. So good. So we have a lot to cover tonight. Before we get to it, there's one kind of interesting thing I read that I thought I'd share with you and see if you had any thoughts on it as well, which is. There's a really interesting article in Baseball America recently about how in the Southern League, they're experimenting with easy grip baseballs. And the article was about whether or not that was going to skew prospect evaluations for pitchers and for hitters, right? Because there's certain pitchers that have high spin rates. And if you give them easy grip baseballs, conceptually, it's going to enhance their ability to spin. Right. And so are we going to get kind of false positives in terms of these pitchers? If we see a real bump in their K rate, right, or their command ratios, is it real or is it not? And conversely, hitters who are now facing kind of a doctored ball in that league, is it going to impact them? And it just also reminded me of an article in Baseball HQ that I read towards the beginning of the pre-draft season about how much this experimenting in minor league baseball is affecting our ability to evaluate prospects. And I'm wondering, do you think about any of those things? Or because I certainly don't, off the top of my head, think about that kind of stuff. And then you read it and you're like, oh, that makes sense,
Yeah, I find it interesting. I find prospect evaluation to be something that I have almost no skill for. So I just have to, like, no pun intended, farm it out. Like Like the stick baseball. It was like a sticky baseball or something like that.
Yes. Well, the easy grip, apparently, I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I think the seams are raised in a way that makes it easier for them to hold on. Because my understanding is that what they're trying to do with the stickiness is they're trying to get a better grip on the seams.
Okay.
And so you sometimes hear pitchers talk about ball. They like balls that are a little harder and have elevated seams. And if most of us, when we bought baseballs over the years as kids, we'll notice that some of them have flat seams and some of them have raised. And apparently, I'm no pitcher, but apparently the raised seams are better. I don't know, but it's interesting.
You could definitely, you can grip it. Like you can, I remember I wasn't very good, but like I remember getting a noticeable difference in movement, and it just felt more secure. Like it felt more confident. Whereas like when I like the smoother, slicker balls, it kind of at least for me, it kind of messed with my head a little bit too. Because you feel like you're at a disadvantage. I feel like from like an evaluation perspective, it might end up just contributing even more to like a fog of war situation where like there's just all these variables, and MLB has such a really stellar track record with transparency around the ball. I have a hunch that they probably won't exactly like tell everybody when they're using different balls. So how do you even account from that? Like,
maybe it's just noise, right? I mean, maybe it ultimately doesn't mean anything, right? So, no, you mentioned like you don't find your skills in evaluating prospects particularly strong. So how do you go about doing it in all these dynasty leagues that you're in? What's your process, generally speaking, for navigating the prospect world?
So I don't find it's like math. I'm terrible at math, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it. I enjoy listening to podcasts about prospects. I enjoy reading a little bit about podcasts. I love the hell out of lists about podcasts, lists about prospects. But like I don't like from in terms of like watching somebody. I feel like I'm almost like I bring too much of like playing memory into it, to where I find some people who maybe have been able to establish a little bit more distance, like intellectual distance to it, are better at it. So like I have a really hard time with the eyeball test. And so what I'll typically do is there's a few different kind of sources that I try to use, and so I come up with a weighted composite score for every player, and I try to update that when the different lists update. It can be tricky, but I try to. With the idea that like, and for me, it's, I don't know, maybe it's not smart or whatever to share this, but it's not like, I mean, we all probably use some variation of the same list. So like for me, it's the ones that I weight the heaviest are RotoWire and RotoWire was a Prospects Live and Baseball Prospectus. And then I really value anybody who has eyes on folks and seems like they know what they're doing. And so the Welsh, his prospect one, I don't find him to be quite as reliable, but I include like a dash of the Welsh in there just because he also had hit on people pretty early. So like that's typically what I'll do. And that to me is fun. I don't have to lay eyes on anybody until they get to the major leagues. It just and that usually allows me to identify folks not faster than everybody. Like I think like you and Duke and a couple other folks tend to beat me to the punch on folks, but it allows me to stay ahead of like maybe 60 to 70% of most leagues, and that's generally like good enough to sort of stay in like a competitive area.
I mean, look, I don't think there's any wrong or right answer to it, as long as it's effective for you, right? And so it sounds in some sense like you're giving like a weighted crowdsourcing to your process using people that you have found to be useful to resources, and that's functionally what I do as well. I don't use lists, but I use like resources that I trust, and I basically look at the scouting grades that I get out of them, and then I look at the numbers, and I've been quite transparent of what I use, right? So it's like I'm not hiding the ball. I mean, you can basically look at what I do. With the secret sauce, to the extent there is any, comes in is just in how you marry all those ingredients together to make your decision. And that's proprietary, if you will. I don't know. I mean, but but that's interesting. That's interesting. I think that it illustrates kind of one of the fun things about dynasty leagues is that there are just a lot of ways to be successful. And with prospects, because they're so young and so volatile, you really can't have one correct method. There could be some bad ways to do it, I guess, but there are a lot of good ways. So let's jump into some of the topics we're going to cover tonight. Like I said, I did want to cover your rebuild and your strategy behind that, and how you feel it went. And we'll talk a little bit about your farm system as it exists now, or at least from the handbook as it existed in February. We can also look at your roster to see moves you might have made. I did want to talk about what I've dubbed your problem child prospects, and you've got 3 kind of varieties of them, and I'm interested to hear your decision making and holding on to them, because I think a lot of owners would have cut them, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. And then finally, at the wrap up of the show, your crushes and fades. And we'll also talk about some of the prospects you have, because you have quite a few that made the ABL handbook top 100. So I'm interested in hearing about that. So let's start by talking about, your big rebuild and restocking the farm system. So walk me through it. What was your thinking in terms of making the decision to cut bait with 2022? And, what were your thoughts in terms of your initial strategy, and then how you felt you executed it? And I suppose there's in-season execution, and then there's the fall leading into draft season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So heading into last season, I felt like, and I think I said it a couple times, that heading into the auction, I felt like I had to thread a needle and absolutely nail that if I wanted to be able to do any kind of postseason damage. And I felt like I was going to probably otherwise I was going to be a bubble team. Sorry, we got a beastly thunderstorm. I don't know if you hear that, but
I do hear it.
It's pretty impressive, and I'm sure my children are losing their minds right now. So apologies.
Well, if you have to take a break, that's okay.
If I hear screaming, if you see me go running out of the room, I could console somebody. That's what's going on.
No worries.
So I thought that I was probably going to be a bubble team unless I just absolutely aced the auction. I thought I did okay, but heading into the season, I didn't have a ton of confidence. And then the first few weeks kind of bore that out. I felt like I was I might have been able to squeak into the playoffs, but probably not do anything. And then I saw Harry sell pretty early. And
Harry, the White Sox owner, and he really sold.
He did, and he I found him to be the most, and I mean this in a very positive way, the most annoying the most annoying team to play against in that first season, because we both had really competitive teams, and he every single time we played, it was really close, and we were kind of neck and neck all through for the Central, with I think the Twins as well. And so when he did that, I thought, shit, Harry's really good. And if Harry, I don't think I'm going to make any noise this year. I can't let Harry corner the market on future assets. I mean, it turns out he still kind of did, but that's
because the selling continued.
Yeah. Well, that's where our paths kind of deviated, right? I felt like I felt like it was important, at least in this league, to maintain kind of a baseline of major league talent. But I don't know, I know there were a lot of frustration or whatever around sort of how he went about doing it, but I don't know, it I would say I don't love it, but I also didn't think of it, and that's, you know what I mean? It was strategically, it's pretty savvy, and I think he handled the kind of blowback around that really kind of gracefully. And so
for those who aren't in the ABL, right, who might be watching this, there's Harry really tanked his team. He not only he basically sold every major league asset he had, and he stockpiled high picks, and then actually even after the draft this year, sold some of his major league talent to get more talent in the minor leagues. So now he has the number 1 ranked system in the ABL handbook, and for good reason. I don't think anybody disputes that it is the strongest minor league team. But you raised an interesting point, John. Right? The way this league is structured, we have divisions, and you have to live with the fact that Harry's in your division. The White Sox are there, right? Because you're competing against them, and you have to start thinking about your ability to compete and win division titles, which obviously affects seeding in the playoffs, right? And whether, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and the Royals and the Guardians.
Yeah, you have a tough division. There's some good owners in that division.
Yeah, there are no like turds in this division. That was part of what drove me to sell early. Was I was like if I can't compete now, then I could doom myself to sort of like upper mediocrity for the next 2 or 3 years if I'm not decisive, especially with Harry doing what Harry did. So like in retrospect, I actually feel really good about that decision, just because there's no way I was going to be competitive in any real way last year. So and honestly, like, rebuilding is fun. I play in a couple OOTP leagues. I used to play in a ton of OOTP leagues, and I used to do this thing where I would like rebuild and then win a championship, and then give up the team and rebuild and win a championship, because like it's not because I'm like good or whatever, but because like that is like I kind of feel like that's one of the funnest things you can do in almost any kind of fantasy or simulation thing. So
yeah, Dynasty is like one of the few formats that really lets you do it effectively. You know, sometimes you could do it in keeper leagues too. I mean, I've seen that happen, and you know, I'm in the process in one of my keeper leagues, having won a couple championships, now rebuilding the team, and so you know, I've just started to hit the ground running again this year. So it's much more fun to do it in Dynasty, I think.
Sure.
So what was your strategy in terms of, like, you know, what you were targeting to get that summer in the trades that you made? What parts of it do you think went well? Is there anything you were disappointed about?
Yeah, I think so generally speaking, across the board in keeper and dynasty leagues, I'm going to target hitters just because of the level of variance, like the relative variance compared to pitchers. The tricky thing though with this league is that like the value in an effective starting pitcher at the major league level is so great that I really felt like in this league, one of the lessons I learned in the first year or two was that I needed to modify that strategy a little bit, just because the reward is so much more than in most leagues. Like in a 16 or 20 team dynasty or keeper league, I think you really should like have only like maybe AA or AAA pitching prospects.
Interesting.
But like unless you have one of those just beastly farm systems where you can just kind of screw around with high risk, high reward. But in this league, I've gone a little bit more pitching heavy in the minors than I typically ever would. But I've tried to like mitigate that by only grabbing onto players kind of in the mid to upper minors. When I sent Yuri Perez to you, I thought, well, I've got him. Like, I was really lucky because I just listened to the right podcast at the right time, and like grabbed him in like just about every league I had. So I thought, well, I've got a ton of him, and he's so stinking young and there's still so much variance that sure, Tony Gonsolin, he's established. Why wouldn't he be a wonderful return? And so like that was part of the thinking for that deal, where the age of Yuri at that time really played into it, if that makes sense.
Oh, and he's still quite young. I mean, he's still a baby relative to the Lovelies. And he's going to probably start the season, I guess, in AAA, which is phenomenal for a guy his age. But it's interesting. You echo the points of, I think, a lot of owners, not only in this league but in other leagues that we're in, of being kind of risk averse to pitching because of their higher variance rate. I tend to be very welcoming of risk, so I have a lot.
Oh, it's impressive.
But I mean, it backfire on you too. I mean, I traded up in our draft to get Lesko, who's recovering from Tommy John, and he's a prep pitcher. And so there's risk there. But I'm willing to accept that risk. But I think you represent majority view, which maybe is right, of like really kind of being resistant. Now you can miss out on guys. And interestingly, one guy you drafted this year was Sasana, who is a deviation for you, right? And we can talk about him too, who I love. I love Sasana. I have him in a lot of leagues.
He was just, I mean, he doesn't match the profile that I'm looking for, but I just couldn't believe the upside was there at that point. Like at that point, I just felt like I I couldn't not.
Yeah, you got him in the early second round of the prospect draft, which is very nice. So, were there any specific prospects you wanted to target, given your preference for hitters, that you were able to acquire as part of the rebuild?
Yeah, I mean, like anybody, I'm going to be looking for some floor protection in a 30 teamer, and so going after like Pete Crow Armstrong and even like Fott, like I felt like, I mean, Fott back then wasn't what he is now. Like it's not like I knew this was going to be Brandon Fott, but he did, like everything that I was kind of seeing and hearing about him indicated that he was probably, there would be a very small chance that he was ever going to be anything less than a number 4 starter. And so in this league, there's a lot of value in that. And then there was also this kind of like early talk about, he's crushing this really difficult league. So it could be a fluke, but it could be an indication. And now, we see it. So like that was more thought, was less about the upside and more about what it sounded to me like a relatively safe gamble. And the funny thing about the Yuri Perez deal is it was like Yuri Perez to Tony Gonsolin, then Tony Gonsolin to like some combination of folks that ended up with Fott. So like it eventually ended up being like Yuri for Fott, which you
can live with.
Yeah, I'll take that over Yuri for Gonsolin or like Matt McLean, which is like the 3rd iteration of that or something like that. So like, so it was it was like Pete Crow Armstrong, and I think who else did I end up getting?
Did you get James Wood in that rebuild? Yeah,
and he was ascending, but he wasn't anything close to what he is now. So to a certain degree, it was some of that was just luck. And that was actually, I think the James Wood thing was where, so there's this interesting thing with people like the Welsh, who I don't know that the Welsh has exactly like the same like technical savvy that a lot of the other prospectors like James Anderson and folks like that do. But he does, like, he is very diligent on getting eyes on people, and he's not afraid to trumpet the hell out of somebody if he sees them. And if I remember correctly, he was going hard on James Wood. And I thought, well, I mean, like, sure, why not? Like everybody else is pretty high on him, and then you've got this one person whose hair is on fire. Yeah, sure, maybe. And that ended up working out in the deal with, I think, Jeff. But like, yeah, so a lot of that was just where people are on lists and how they're trending on lists, and with the idea that there's also going to be some Landon Necks in there.
Yep. So let's take a look at your farm system and how it it played out in the real world. And so we'll share this is from the prospect handbook that I put together, and not that this is like immutable or anything, but you can see you're highlighted there. You ended up with one of the few 100 scores for your prospects that you netted, and this is after the draft, right? So it includes the guys like Sasana that you were able to nab. Were you surprised by where you landed on this in any way?
Yeah, but I think most people probably are. Unless you're in the number 1 spot, you're probably surprised, right? So like, I wouldn't. Well, maybe number 2. I don't think anybody thinks that they're going to dethrone Harry in this regard for a year or two. But I would say I probably have like the number 2 or number 3 system, just based on my evaluations. But I mean, there's just a very obvious bias there. Like I think there's probably like 15 of us who feel like we have the number 2 or number 3 system.
You know what? You want owners who feel that way. You want conviction in their process, right? And so that's great. I mean, the other thing I would say about this is certainly not gospel. This is just what I came up with. But these are actually pretty close, right? Between basically 4 and 6, and they could very easily move. So the difference between 102 and 109 actually isn't that great. It's probably 1 player or 2 players that could switch those around pretty quickly. Harry's just like, as you pointed out, just like running away with the thing. And I think everybody just accepts that as being reality for now.
And Duke having like that farm system with that team.
No, it's illegal. I mean,
it's completely filthy. It's absurd.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was joking with Duke was on the last episode, and I was joking that this is only his 4th year doing Dynasty or something, and he somehow has a juggernaut Major League team and a juggernaut minor league system. So people probably need to be a little bit careful trading with him.
He stayed disciplined within a couple of us, and especially me in that first season didn't. Like there's at least one or two people, definitely including me, who could be in better positions if we were more disciplined. Because I think Duke and I were kind of neck and neck for a lot of that first season, and then I went hog wild and gave up a ton of prospect depth, and he didn't. He did a fantastic job of being really. I mean, like, he took a couple measured shots, but nothing. He didn't go too far, and so that's. I mean, it's interesting the role that discipline plays in a league like this is really kind of surprising. Or maybe not surprising. It shouldn't be surprising, but I think it's really, really important, because there's always going to be a point where you kind of get the fuckets and you think like, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just go. It's going to be fun. It's more fun. Let's go. And he's done a fantastic job of just kind of like sticking to the plan and staying kind of between the ditches, so to speak. So
yeah. And I think, interesting, his approach on prospects is a bit like that. He's got a lower risk tolerance, and maybe that's a good thing, right? Because he's going to play it a little bit safer and go with more blue chip stocks, so to speak. And that's where he is. And I think you're right that he didn't go hog wild in terms of trading away players, at least not in this league, right? I mean, that we saw, and certainly some owners just seem to churn their rosters and trades, right, in this league. And a lot of their players end up on the teams that win divisions. So kudos to Duke, for assembling this juggernaut that he's put together, and it made us suffer all through. But fortunately, you and I are in the American League, so there's still a path. There's still a path to the World Series. So
we don't have to deal with Duke and Jeff over there.
Nope. And they're the same division. Yeah. So let's take a look at the just the top 100 list, because I think it's interesting. After you were able to make all these trades, you ended up with actually several players that made this top 100 list, and they could be anywhere on other top 100 lists too. There's nothing magical. I mean, I've got Curtis Mead and James Wood at 33 and 34. They could be much higher on somebody's list, but I think they're on just about every list that you see. And you end up with 6. I mean, you've got a whole bunch here, including some of the guys we were talking about, right? It's Crow Armstrong. We already saw Wood, and another guy we haven't really talked about is Fat. You have who now in this league is very close, and there's Sasana. But Fat's a guy in this league who has extreme value right now because he's on the cusp of making it to the majors, right? And he profiles as a guy that could be a number 2 or number 3 starter, right? And you get him for $1. Right?
Yeah, so, well, and I think and he was who Yuri eventually turned into for me.
I got it.
Yeah, sorry, I was pronouncing it. Is it Fat? I hope it's Fat. I would like it to be Fat.
I think it is, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it.
Yeah.
So on today's show, it's Fat.
It sounds great. It's much better that way.
Yeah. But he's really some guy. He's somebody I've had in a bunch of different leagues, and I've traded him away, and now I have 0 shares, I think, of him. But so you live and learn. But maybe that's my Yuri, right? Trading away. But I've got plenty of Yuri shares as a result, so I'm all right. But yeah, so are you pleased with the way things netted out for you? Are you happy with the rebuild so far?
Yeah, I am. I feel like as far as like my decisions in this league, the first year, I think like towards the end, I would redo a lot of my decisions as far as like going too far. But then the second year, I mean, like there's always going to be a few things here or there, like with prospects, no one's ever like you're never going to hit 100%. But at this point, I feel pretty good about everybody that I was able to pull in that restocking. So yeah, and especially like it was interesting. I almost felt bad for the teams that sold at a more traditional time last year. It did seem like the market just kind of fell apart a little bit as far as contenders.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the assets, and this brings up an interesting dynasty league strategy question, right? Particularly, this is not a roto league, so it's head to head, and you're competing throughout the year, and there is this consolation bracket that you can make money in, right? And there's pretty good money even in the winners bracket. If you get eliminated, like, a couple games in, we have this division money. So there's a lot of ways to get back your buy-in. But it does highlight this interesting question, even in that format where there's so much on the table, even, during the season about when to sell, right? Because if you do it early, and we saw teams like the Rockies, the White Sox, and then maybe a couple others sold basically like in May, June. That's when the selling started, right? And that's when you oftentimes can get the most bang for your buck, right? Because, other owners who are buying have good prospects still. They haven't sold them, right? And the guys who waited to the more traditional deadline had less attractive options, right? And on top of that, you've also got the salary cap, right? Bearing down on you. So if I go out and acquire Max Scherzer from Harry, which is the guy I acquired from him, that's a $40 contract or so, and now I'm up against the cap, and so I can't make a trade with you or somebody else, down the road, for a marquee player, right? And I don't remember, but did you make a lot of trades later in the season? I thought you did most of your work pretty early on.
I tried, but that's part of what made me feel bad for everybody who waited to sell, because like I had some decent assets and I got pennies on the dollar for them. Like I kind of worked the Discord phone, so to speak, and had very little luck. And some of them I even waited. I felt like, well, let me just let me let Aaron Savali improve in value for a little while, and didn't happen because I figured he was kind of a safe bet to hold his value, and I don't think I got very much for him and for several other people that were traded basically anytime after July. So it's
you also, I think the complication, sorry to interrupt, but you have the complication of there being winners or perceived winners and losers at that point, right? In terms of the teams that had restocked themselves. So it had a dampening effect, I think, on other owners being willing to buy more right?
True.
They're kind of folding at that point. Maybe on the river. They're like, they've gotten past the turn. I mean, they've gotten past the flop and they get to the turn and they're like, I'm not going to wait for that river card. So it's an interesting dynamic, I think, in this league.
Do you think it'll be the same this year?
It's a really good question. I think obviously the executive committee who governs our rulemaking, they've made some changes to incentivize owners not to sell by penalizing them if they do sell and come short of certain milestones in terms of points scored. And I think that will be something of a deterrent, although I think Harry is a good example of where he just doesn't care. He's like, you want to cap my salary cap when I'm tanking, that's fine. And they'll have to make more adjustments, right? And maybe having that bravado is the way to do it. So I think we're going to see Harry do more of that, although I do question how much room he has on his roster for more studs. You only have 20 minor league slots, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
But it's also interesting. I think some of the way some of the teams are set up right now. I think a lot of the selling has actually happened before the season has started. Teams like the Rangers and the Marlins are pretty thin on the major league level, and so we'll see selling at some point. I would be surprised. Maybe I'll be wrong. I'd be surprised if it's that early this year.
I'm not in love with my roster right now. I think it's better than it was heading into last season. And I think it has the potential to be very good, but I still need some things to break my way. So I've been thinking about at what point,
right. When do you pull the trigger again?
Yeah.
Right?
But I don't know if the market has any juice in it anymore at all. Before the season's almost, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's interesting because my perspective and my strategy right now is I'm pretty happy with my team, and I think I can win the division I'm in. It's always going to be a challenge, and you don't know what's going to happen. But I think you see other teams having kind of already loaded up, like the Guardians are very loaded right now. And it already serves as a disincentive to me to really sell prospects. If I could be competitive and get into the playoffs with the roster I have, why should I sell 2 or 3 stud prospects for a couple of veterans that are going to maybe lose a closer matchup with the Guardians in the playoffs? I mean, so I don't know. I mean, we'll see how the season goes. There are always injuries. I think last year when these teams started selling, I got very aggressive and started buying because I felt like my division was very winnable. And I had no intentions of competing last year going in because I was a new owner and I didn't have a lot of good keepers in terms of my contracts, on a major league roster. But when I saw people punting and opening up, particularly teams in the American League, selling, I was like, well, I'm going to buy because I can win the division and I can get in the playoffs and maybe make some noise. And that ended up being at least partially true. I ended up getting eliminated in the first round when Scherzer missed the playoff series because he's brittle. But I think this year I'm going to be a little bit more cautious, but maybe other people won't. I think, as you pointed out earlier in the podcast, I think you always get this urge to go for it. Right. And you're going to make tough decisions. So let's talk about, I think what I've been deeming your problem child prospects, and that's my name and not yours. But you've got 3 guys on your roster that are really interesting to me. And the first one is Wilman Diaz, who's a prospect that I really liked in his draft year. And he's in the Dodgers organization, which does a terrific job grooming prospects, bringing them along, and also identifying prospects from Latin America and the Caribbean. And he's obviously been very kind of disappointing so far in his his performance at the DHL and DSL, and elsewhere. And I'm wondering, what's made you hold on to him? Why haven't you cut bait? Because I've seen a lot of owners do that, just cut him outright.
Yeah, for really all 3 of the problem child, the folks who I'm guessing are the problem children. They all have this flicker of promise that if there's a prospect available that I think outweighs that, then I'd be willing to make the move. But I just haven't found anybody that I've always had somebody else I could cut. And so Wilman Diaz is funny because I remember you were really into him at the same time I was into him and took him. And a few months ago, I remember thinking oh shit, let's see if Steve is still into Wilman Diaz. And I think I offered it. I think I sent you an offer or something like that, and you're like, no.
Yeah. Well, I think unfortunately, the hard thing about him now is it's what are you going to give for him?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's basically the level of value you can confer is you're the lowest guy you're willing to cut. Right, who incrementally improves your roster somehow, right? over the value of holding Wilman Diaz, and that's something that certainly I would entertain, given his potential upside. But these prospects that have kind of fallen flat, at least temporarily, and I think it is important to remember that these guys can take off, right? Yep. They are very young. I mean, he's still a kid. He's 19 years old. Who knows, right? And
he's in a new country. There's so much that's dynamic these things that it does. I can't cite any right now, but it does. I have this anecdotal memory of several prospects who started here, collapsed, and then a few years later, after they got their bearings or their body developed, or they got used to their body after it developed, or whatever. Yeah. And so
they grow into it. Or they get the confidence, or there's some kind of mechanical change in their approach. They get good coaching, and things just click for them. And sometimes they're modest adjustments. It's interesting. I was watching this is not directly apropos of what you're saying, but it's similar. I was watching a documentary on the 51 base season where the Giants beat the Dodgers on the Bobby Thompson home run, and one of the anecdotes, which was a famous anecdote they were telling, was about Willie Mays, who got called up that year. He's a rookie. He's 20 years old. He gets called up to the majors, and he starts his career abysmally. He was hitting .043, deep into the beginning of the season. And Leo DeRocher put his arm around him and said, you're my center fielder. You're going to play every day. And from that moment on, he started turning it around. And he's Willie Mays, but their confidence is a factor. With a guy like Diaz, so I don't know, maybe he's going to end up being a good ball player, but it's really hard to trade for him right now. And you're in an interesting position because the cost to you is just the roster spot, right? So you can hold him and see what happens, and maybe he'll take off, right? Then the other problem child that I wanted to talk to you about was Christian Robinson. And so, like, if Wilman Diaz is the ugly, right? In the Clint Eastwood movie, Christian Robinson is the bad, right? Right, and we'll get to the good in a minute. But like, what's the story with Christian Robinson? He's obviously had a ton of off the field issues, right? And he's another guy that I've seen sold, low or cut in some leagues. And I'm curious your thoughts there. Maybe the same,
Yeah. I think if he's the bad, he's also probably the expensive because he's like $13 or something like that.
Yeah.
So the likelihood that at this point, it is a pretty slim likelihood that he becomes worth that. The thing that's been, and again, like I've been close to cutting him a couple times, but the thing that I keep coming back to is like he's had all these off the field issues. There's all these sort of testimonials to him not being a Khalil Watson kind of character where it's like, where there are kind of seemingly deep character issues that are going to lead to probably stifling that talent. With Robinson, it sounds like, from what I gather, he made mistakes, but that were like a significant kind of aberration for him. And so there's a part of me that thinks like, well, yeah, he has these legal issues, but they I think are not, I don't take those as an indication of him, like as a, I don't know, like a character of his character, of the likelihood that that'll impact. So, and then there's this other thing where like he was a massive prospect, right? Like he was, and it wasn't just like a quick IFA thing. Like he was showing it for a little while there. So the talent has to still be there. So like the fact that the talent must be somewhere in there, and it's not like he's not playing baseball at all. He's just not playing in the way that we would like. I wouldn't be stunned if all of a sudden he got some good news, and it's like a Royce Lewis situation where everybody kind of gets real sad about him for a long time, and then holy shit, there's Royce Lewis, and oh my gosh, he's the number one prospect on a couple lists, and then sad again. But like I think I wouldn't be at all surprised if that happened with Robinson. I wouldn't say it's a super high likelihood. I would put it in like somewhere between 5 and 10%. But for the roster spot to have the possibility of sort of an outlandish talent relatively quickly, and $13 is a lot, but like it's also, if he hits in the way that it's like, I think there's a 5 to 10% chance of him hitting, then it's worth it. Having said that, like watch me cut him in next month. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, like, you raised an interesting point about the economics of our league, which is, we got a 260 budget going into the draft, and it gets raised to 360 in season. But that draft constraint makes it hard to hold a guy like Robinson, because if he gets called up, that's $13 against your cap going into next season. Right. And that's a pretty substantial commitment to a young prospect, particularly if his cup of coffee is very brief the prior year. And if you get like a full view of him that prior year, it makes the decision a little bit easier. But oftentimes if they just get up for like, 10 at bats or something, you're like, what do I do with this guy? But having said all that, if he turns around and he hits in the minors, he also of a sudden becomes a guy you might be able to trade.
Absolutely.
Right. And, there are plenty of owners in this league who are not deterred by high, prices on prospects. I think the highest contract I have for a prospect is $5 for Nick Gonzalez. I loathe taking that on to begin with, but I did it because he's a, guy who can play second base and hit for power. So it's pretty unusual. That's interesting. So the other problem child is what I would call the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right. And, I think he's a problem child only because he's like not available, which is Sagana, who's even the major leagues. And I guess you somehow got grandfathered in on this ability to draft him, because we typically can't sign or draft players that aren't actually in the major league system. So how did that work out? Because I wasn't in the league when you got him. I'm curious how that came about. And then why are you holding on to him? It may be a very similar answer to the ones you just gave, but I'm just curious because he's no spring chicken either.
No, he's not. It's basically a lottery ticket situation for me. There's that, and there's so like the way it happened was, if I remember correctly, it was during the inaugural draft, and he, I think maybe I don't know if we just didn't have like a rule on that yet. And I think
Mhm.
the idea, maybe if I remember correctly, the idea was like, well, let's not like penalize me because I did a thing that we didn't have a rule for. I could be mistaken about
Right.
that. I think that's basically how it played out. And now when I see him, I think, well, you know, if he does eventually make his way over here, then I could have, like, it sounds like from a talent perspective, he'd probably be uh, uh, probably like a number 4 starter, which in this league is way more valuable than it in almost any other league. And so there's
Sure.
that, and then there's also this weird. It almost like I don't collect baseball cards anymore, but like I know that there are like error cards or whatever
Uh-huh.
that have like a peculiar value because they're these like weird one-off things, not by virtue of anything cool about them other than they're just weird one-off things. So it does kind of feel like almost like a collector's item at this point. But
Right. You've got a vintage pitcher.
yeah, exactly. Like I've got this. Like this is the one time when we could do this, and for some reason that matters to me. For some
Yeah,
irrational.
you're like, it's like one of those ball players that still got to wear 42 after they retired it, right? I mean, it's like, you're like Mo Vaughn, right?
Mhm.
Or Mariano Rivera, if you will, whatever your preference is. That's funny. Yeah, we'll see if he ever comes stateside, but he's 33 years old now, right? And so you might have like a number 4 starter for a couple of years. And to your point, that has value in this league because it's so
Yeah.
deep. And I just like paid $4 in Fab for Hunter Gaddis, who I think is pitching tonight, and he got lit up like a Christmas tree last year when I got called up, and I chose not to start him this evening because like we have a starts per week limit, so I'm banking the start, but I plan to start him as the next one, even if it gets lit up tonight.
I saw you got him. You got him like a day before I thought about getting him, which is not an unfamiliar feeling at this point.
Well, I wasn't the only bidder. I mean, there was I bid 4, and there was a 3, and there was a 2, and there was a 1. So people were in on him, but we have a limited budget too for bidding. I'm down to $30 for the rest of the year.
Oh, wow.
Having started with 50. So pick your poison. So Hunter Gaddis might be my poison. He'll be the hemlock for my fad budget. But that's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right. So listen, why don't we talk a little bit because I'm interested. And this is always fascinating to me to hear people's crushes and fades on prospects. Crushes being the guys you really love, and fades being the one maybe you're against consensus on. And it doesn't have to necessarily be limited to your guys in ABL. I mean, you're in so many dynasty leagues. Maybe there's somebody you have a lot of shares of elsewhere that you don't have in ABL for one reason or another.
Yeah. And I think like for this league, because of the format of this league, I think there are some prospects that are particularly valuable that I really wish I had. Miguel Vargas, I have like an emotional thing around him because in the first prospect draft, I had traded up, because like you trade up sometimes you trade up like on the pick, but then sometimes you trade up within like a pick or two with the idea that like they'll probably be there. And I did that, and I think I traded up like 3 picks early, and everything was going great, and then I got sniped 1 pick ahead. Yeah,
that hurts. That hurts.
Yeah, it did, and so like, and I think I picked like Greg Jones or somebody like that with my previous pick. You know what I mean? So like, I totally should have gone this route, of course. So, and I think like his profile, his hitter profile is probably really, really valuable in this league. Hey, say hello to my wife. So yeah, Miguel. Do you have Miguel Vargas or who?
No, I don't, and not in this league. I actually I can look up who has him. I don't know who has him in this league, off the top of my head anyway. But yeah, he's terrific. I think you're right that in this league, he provides a really interesting value because of his on-base ability. I mean, he's not just a good hitter in the minor leagues, but he actually can take some walks. Because we play in a points league, that has value. And he's going to play in the Dodgers system and that great lineup. And he's going to have a lot of versatility too, right? I mean, he's got to be able to play, middle infield probably at this point. I think he's going to play some first base. And obviously he's capable of playing third base, right? So to have that sort of versatility is like pretty cool. So any other guys you think about in terms of crushes and fades?
Yeah, there are, and one more thing on Vargas, I'm pretty sure I
Yeah.
traded for him in that first year, like first those sentimental reasons, and then dealt him in that whole like prospect.
That aggressive move you were making, Chris. Yeah, yeah,
There's that
yeah.
like thing there. There's some prospects like Jordan Lawler and Manzardo that I'm into in just about every league, but like for this league, just because of the value, like the OVP value and sort of high floor value, players like Sal Frelick and Connor Norby, I think, are probably gold here. And like Josh Young just to some degree, Osvaldo Peraza, like Evan Carter. Golly, I tried to get Evan Carter a bunch of times and haven't had any success. Like those
he looks really good, really good. Another guy that I've held and traded away. I have no shares of Evan Carter anymore. So it's like it just, but it goes to the point. Like you can get on guys early, right? And then they start getting hot in terms of prospect list. Then you like trade them for something, right? And then it turns out, you and the talent, the evaluators who were relying on were right. They're studs. And it hurts. Like Ellie De La Cruz is another guy that I was on early and it dealt away everywhere. So yeah, so I feel the pain. I feel the Vargas pain. So are there guys that you're fading versus consensus? Guys maybe you're out on that other people still like, or ones you just hate on for whatever reason?
Yeah, like as far as consensus goes, there's this guy Edwin Arroyo who middle of last year started getting a whole bunch of steam, and I don't know why, but like I had a really hard time with his profile and maybe like how far away he was relative to what his strengths were supposed to be. That like I have him almost nowhere. I think I have him in like one league, and I'm sure I could totally be wrong about that, but just something about him. Maybe I just got this idea in my head and it's stuck. But I've had a really hard time getting on board with him. And then probably the biggest for me is Quinn Priester. I've never gotten the Quinn Priester thing, and I still see him taken really high or valued pretty greatly. So like I just it's kind of baffled me this whole time, and I think now on most lists he's collapsed a good bit. So I feel a little bit vindicated there. But this whole time I've just been like, what the hell is everybody on about Quinn Priester?
Yeah, I felt that way about Jeter Downs.
Really? Nice.
Who I never got the hype on. I was way below consensus on him. I mean, this guy would have rostered if he was, available where I valued him, but he never was. Because people are just like really, really high on the guy. But I just, I looked at his batted ball profile, where he was age-wise, and I just never understood it. And the scouting grades that I was reading on were pretty, vanilla. I would call them, not terrible, but vanilla. And Quinn Priester's a guy who I think kind of is similar to that for me. I've never been a Quinn Priester guy either. I don't own him anywhere. And he's always gone much higher in drafts and in trade discussions than I would care to like contemplate, which is interesting.
I would hate to say this is a fade because I'm going to look like an idiot, I'm sure, like probably this week. But like Jordan Walker, there's the swing and miss has me. I absolutely see him as top 10. I just don't know that I see him as like, I'm not sure he's top 5. And that puts me, just that small difference puts me way outside of consensus. But the thing I keep hearing from a few different folks is just like, he's probably going to be great, but also I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up really, really struggling for a few years with the contact issues. And that, I mean, like that.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm done. I'm sorry, man.
No, that's all right. Don't be sorry. It's a talk show. We're talking. It's interesting. So Jordan Walker is a guy. I'm a Cardinals fan, so I obviously love the upside and love the idea of him being a star. He's a guy that I was very hesitant to take in drafts that first year he came out because of the contact issues. He's got a ton of power. I mean, the power is just through the roof. And you're still seeing that right now at the major league level. And I think it's important to remember how young he is. And that he's a big dude. And these big guys have long levers, and they are strikeout prone. And it'll be very interesting to see how he adjusts and how quickly it takes him, because I think there is going to be for him a period of struggle.
Yeah.
I don't know how long that period is going to be. But what he has done at various levels is kind of climb the learning curve with some alacrity. And, he basically, leapfrog AAA, right, to go right to the majors. That's a lot, for a guy of his makeup to do. It's not like, a guy with a 60 hit tool or an 80 hit tool. Like, it's not Wander Franco, right, who has had his own struggles staying healthy. But, those guys who have great hit tools, tend to be able to weather the major league pitching a little bit more easily. And guys who have great power but poor hit tools, there can be some lumps in the road. And I think Jordan's going to face that. But I don't know that takes him, or I don't know where that puts him on the list. And I say that as somebody who I don't even believe in lists really. So, I mean, but I take your point. I mean, people are building him up as if he's Babe Ruth right now, right? And, maybe he's just a good ball player.
It seems like the range of outcomes this year is like anywhere between Joe Adele and Julio Rodriguez. Like I could see either this year. This year.
That's right. I mean, I think what's interesting is I'm in 3 NFBC leagues this year, and I saw him go in drafts. This is before he made the team. Okay, so there's still a doubt whether he's going to be in the majors, and the NFBC format, you don't have any minor league slots and you don't have any IL slots. And so every roster spot is like gold. And these guys in these drafts who are a lot of people who deem themselves to be experts, right? They're paying double digits in the draft for him in auctions. And that's a lot for a kid who hasn't had an at bat in the majors and has the profile that he has, to commit to a dude. And particularly when he hadn't made any at the team yet. There was some question whether he was going to or not, so people really love him. And I agree that the upside's there. Maybe we're spoiled by Julio Rodriguez, right? And we see a guy like that take off and, we think he's the next guy. That just seemed irrational. As much as I love Jordan, that seemed irrational to me to pay that much money for him. He was basically off my board.
Yeah.
If he'd gone for $1, I might have taken him, but that wasn't happening. Go ahead.
Oh, sir. I was going to say NFBC that I've played NFBC for the last few years, but I live in Michigan, so this year we can't because of the licensing issue, which I've been emailed them like 4 times this spring. Like, is it fixed yet? Is it fixed yet? Can I get it in on your guillotines yet? And no.
Yeah, it's an interesting format. It's my first year doing it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm doing 2 leagues with a friend of mine who I'm in a bunch of dynasty leagues with and keeper leagues with, and then one of them I'm doing solo. So we'll see how we do. But it was a lot of fun. I went to one of the live auctions in New York, and that was fun. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, nice. Okay, that was a lot
of fun. Yeah, that was an interesting experience. And the league that I'm in, the defending champion is in. Of the live auction, format. So he won $30K last year.
Who was it?
His name's Steve something. I don't remember his last name. I could look it up. He's in my league, but it was interesting to see him draft. I came back from that. That's the league I'm doing solo. Okay. I came back from that draft, and I had one more draft, the same level of buy-in with my co-owner. And I said, I've seen the defending champion, and we can win this. It's like, let's do it. So we have a high risk roster we drafted in that one with a lot of upside, but we'll see how that plays out. My other live draft auction is kind of down the middle in terms of risk. But it's fun. So you're missing it this year.
I am, yeah. Especially every year I've usually played just 1 or 2 OCs, and then my favorite format of all, like maybe even just a smidge more than Dynasty and Keeper, is Guillotine. I just love that. And NFBC does a great job with their guillotines, and I find them to be really winnable. If you just have to be halfway disciplined, because people just kind of freak out about getting chopped, and so you can kind of hoard resources and hammer at the end most of the time, and it's just a really fun I don't know. I find it to be, and it doesn't require like the same time investment as a lot of other leagues do. So you can kind of roll with one of those in the background, one or two of those. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know. I hope they get that stuff fixed because yeah, I miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully it gets fixed by next year. Presumably it will be. But you can come to New York and do a draft with me.
Awesome.
You know, that was a lot of fun. So maybe we'll do Vegas next year. I don't know. We'll see. You know, well, listen, I'll let you get back to your wife and to your kids, so you don't get forced to sleep on the couch tonight or anything. I don't want to, cause any discord or disruption in your life. But I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was a lot of fun listening to you talk about your rebuild and your prospects and hearing your perspective. I think just on Dynasty in general, we can all learn from that, given how expert you are now after that initial buy-in league that you did with all those prospects, which is incredible. But yeah, great to have you on. Happy to have you on again sometime down the road. Maybe we can revisit how your strategy is working out for this year and whether you decide to sell again. That'd be interesting. But I will not trade you your Perez.
We'll see. We'll see.
No. You're staying right in Baltimore this year. But that.
Just I just want to say thanks so much for the invitation. I've had a blast chatting about this league, and also like, not to sound like a kiss ass, but just thanks Duke for running this thing and creating it. It's I think it's a rare thing to have a league like this sort of successful and well run, and yeah, so hats off.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's why I called Duke the Godfather on the last episode, and I meant it. We all praise to Duke. We're very lucky to have this league. All right, well, listen, John, it was great to have you on, and the folks that watch the podcast, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, so we have more subscribers, and remember to ABP, always be prospecting. All right, good night.